On August 6, 2010, Moeckel, survivor of the 1945 bombing of Hiroshima, described her experience. Quote, "There were people whose eyeballs had popped out of their sockets. There were those who held their babies, burnt black. They themselves had no skin. There were those whose intestines had come out of their bodies and confused. They struggled to put them back in." Kodama was not referring to some unfathomable TV show or novel, nor was she describing a fictitious nightmare. Rather, Kodama was alluding to the August 6th, 1945 bombing of Hiroshima, Japan. A bombing that, while took the lives of thousands of civilians, can act as an example. An example for the threat and peril that our world's burgeoning supply of nuclear weapons poses to our very humanity.
Due to the humanitarian threats that nuclear weapons currently pose, as well as the failure of the NPT to effect global disarmament, a new nuclear weapons ban treaty, supplementing the NPT and supported by incentives for both current nuclear weapon states and countries actively seeking nuclear weapons, is essential for world peace and stability. In order to address this, we have 3 parts to our presentation. Part 1, the humanitarian threat. Part 2, the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And Part 3, the strategy for disarmament.
In order to understand the truly large humanitarian threat intrinsic to nuclear bombs, it's first necessary to look at the 2 types of nuclear bombs: fission bombs and thermonuclear weapons. As has been previously explained, fission bombs are predicated predominantly on the fission reaction, whereas thermonuclear fusion weapons are predicated on the fission reaction in the primary and the fusion reaction in the secondary. More importantly, however, it's necessary to note that whereas the Hiroshima A bomb, dropped in 1945, had an explosive yield of about 16 kilotons, most modern-day thermonuclear and even some modern-day fission bombs have a nuclear yield of hundreds upon hundreds of kilotons, truly showing that if a nuclear bomb was dropped today, the damage affected would be truly beyond comprehension.
Now, as we've seen, there are several short-term effects, health effects, in fact. So some of them include the loss of life and wounds coming from detonation, including severe burns. Radiation from detonation may kill in minutes, days, or weeks.
As has been also explained, there are also a number of long-term health effects that resulted from the dropping of a bomb in Hiroshima. Among them included radiation and blood illnesses that over the course of days and even weeks would affect bleeding and destruction of intestinal fluids, overgrowth of scar tissue, known as keloids, and depicted in that picture, also plagued the victims following the bombing of Hiroshima. More specifically, a number of scientific studies have confirmed that chromosomal aberrations increased with higher radiation doses. Moreover, exposures in utero close to the bombing produced a higher rate of neonatal and infantile death. In addition, not only was mental retardation noted in about 25% of the newborn survivors, but a higher rate of microcephaly, as depicted in that photo, was also noted. Finally, as illustrated by the graph and the chart on the board, following the bombing of Hiroshima, the rate of leukemia spiked drastically, and the number of eye cataracts also increased substantially.
Some of the environmental effects from detonation include the destruction of buildings and public services, black rain from radiation, as well as a decrease in manufacturing ability and food production because of the loss of workers. Furthermore, the explosion of several bombs could start a nuclear winter and disrupt global climate and agriculture, possibly leading to famine and starvation.
And likewise, because of these atrocities, both long-term and short-term, both health and environmental, that developed from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki the humanitarian approach, an approach stressing the need to look at nuclear weapons from the effect that they have on humanity evolved. In fact, Jayantha Dhanapala, while he was serving as the president of the 1995 Nuclear Nonproliferation Conference, expresses this approach best when he states, quote, "Disarmament is preeminently a humanitarian endeavor for the protection of the human rights of people and their survival. We have to see the campaign for nuclear disarmament as analogous to the campaigns of those against slavery, for gender equality, and for the abolition of child labor. Both the 1961 UN Resolution 1653 and the Vancouver Declaration echo the sentiment, showing that nuclear weapons are, quote, incompatible with elementary considerations of humanity.
Now, the final document in the 2010 NPT Review Conference showed, quote, deep concern at the continued risk for humanity represented by the possibility these weapons could be used and the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from the use of nuclear weapons, end quote. The consequences spoken of make the elimination of nuclear weapons urgent, and to that effect, there have been 3 international conferences in the past 2 years. The first in Oslo in 2013, the second in Nayarit, Mexico in 2014, and the third in Vienna in 2014 as well. Civil society has in fact played a huge role in the context of these conferences. The ICANN, which is the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, has a civil society, and it has had several meetings about banning nuclear weapons, in which more than 600 participants from over 70 countries have attended to shed their light on perspectives concerning the consequences of not banning nuclear weapons on human health, the economy, and the environment.
And as is always the case, there are also a large number of opportunities and challenges presented by the Humanitarian Initiative. One of the largest challenges presented by this initiative is the extremely prevalent argument that the system of deterrence and alliances throughout our world would shield the world from ever experiencing the humanitarian threats of a nuclear weapons, an idea that would essentially make the humanitarian approach illegitimate. This idea is best espoused by the past UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, when she stated, quote, a world without nuclear weapons would be less stable and more dangerous for all of us. Others argue that the humanitarian initiative's demanding of banning nuclear bombs works against the notion that nuclear weapons might deter aggression. This notion is established by Ronald Reagan's quote, we rely on nuclear weapons to deter aggression and assure world peace. However, as we will show throughout the entire course of this presentation, these notions, these arguments and challenges presented against the humanitarian approach are predominantly grounded in misconceptions, and the advantages of this approach outweigh any potential disadvantages or challenges. For one, the humanitarian approach takes into account the worst possible scenario. As is evidenced by the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the humanitarian initiative also calls attention to the risks that nuclear weapons pose, risks that are all the more plausible and real in a society like ours.
Now, there is further support for the humanitarian initiative. The first point being that it provides security. So the use of nuclear weapons violates international humanitarian law, yes. However, unless we eliminate nuclear weapons, there is a chance that they might be, either accidentally or on purpose, used again. Furthermore, disarming nuclear weapons allows funding for these arms to be directed towards other things like healthcare, education, and general infrastructure. Now, there is an idea that since the danger has decreased, or the number of weapons has decreased, and therefore the danger has decreased. This is a misconception. Though a number of nuclear weapons has decreased, the power and potency of these weapons has only increased, posing a greater humanitarian threat. The black line on the chart is the doomsday clock, kept by the Society of Concerned Scientists. And as you can see, this has shortened over time. At the beginning, it was nearly 10 minutes to midnight, midnight representing global catastrophe, and now it is only 3 minutes to midnight.
And likewise, because of this notion, the vast majority of countries in our world have verbally declared their disdain and hate of nuclear weapons. This is illustrated in this graphic produced by the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, known as ICANN, showing how the majority of countries, from Iceland to Burma to Cambodia, are adamantly speaking out against nuclear weapons and stressing the need to look at it from the perspective of the humanitarian approach. The next part of our presentation really focuses on the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty and how by itself it remains largely ineffectual in affecting global disarmament.
Now, as we've seen before, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty has 3 goals, which are outlined on the screen. It was signed in 1968, entered into force in 1970, and extended indefinitely in 1995. Now, originally it had 190 parties, of which it included 5 nuclear states. However, there are only 189 now, as North Korea announced its withdrawal in 2003.
Edith Clark, a decorated professor at the University of Virginia and one of the leading figures in international relations, once stated, quote, the development of the United Nations as a custodian of collective legitimacy is an important political phenomenon of our time. Meaning that in order for any resolution, any piece of legislation to be legitimate, it not only has to be able to be participated in by every single state, but also has to be free and immune from double standards. We would like to argue that the predominant flaw with the NPT is that it lacks this idea of collective legitimacy. For instance, the NPT argues at one point that nuclear weapons are inherently bad. But then it goes on to say at a later portion that certain countries have a right, have a justification to continue to possess them. In fact, Tony Blair, the current Prime Minister of Britain, once stated, quote, that the Nuclear Nonproliferation Conference, Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty makes it absolutely clear that Britain has the right to possess nuclear weapons. The Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty allows certain countries to feel that they have a justification, an inherent right to continue proliferating nuclear weapons inside their own borders. And for that, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty will never be able to effect global-wide disarmament. Other flaws intrinsic to the document include the fact that it does not place restrictions on nationally owned enrichment facilities, as illustrated by Iran's breakout capabilities. There are also few penalties for violating or withdrawing from it, as illustrated by North Korea's relatively peaceful withdrawal in 2003. Not all nuclear states are party to the NPT, and that Article 5, which specifies that nuclear weapon states should give research regarding energy to non-nuclear weapon states, is not being respected or put in good faith by most nuclear weapon states.
So to summarize, these are 3 points that hold with us the most dissatisfaction with the NPT regime. The first being that it creates a system of haves and have-nots. The NPT has an arbitrary line in time. If nuclear weapons were tested before 1967, having them was allowed. However, if they were tested after, then the country in question could not keep them. The second point being that nuclear countries have not attempted Article 6. Article 6 basically talks about how countries holding nuclear weapons would pursue disarmament as soon as they could. And once upon that road, they would try to disarm nuclear weapons as efficiently as possible. Although we have seen a decrease in more disarmament of the nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapon states have not, or their rate of disarmament has slowed down considerably. And the third point being that nuclear countries have not provided developing nations with research, as Chris mentioned before. Many third world countries are disappointed in the nuclear weapon states' willingness to extend research for nuclear energy, as emphasized by the NPT.
Echoing these statements, a number of world leaders have verbally expressed their disdain for the NPT. Among them is Israel's Prime Minister, who stated in 2010, quote, "This resolution is deeply flawed and hypocritical. It ignores the realities of the Middle East and the real threats facing the region and the entire world." India's External Affairs Minister in a visit to Tokyo in 2007 also provided insight into countries' views on the NPT, stating, quote, "If India did not sign the NPT, it is not because of its lack of commitment for non-proliferation, but rather because we consider the NPT as a flawed treaty that did not recognize the need for universal, non-discriminatory verification and treatment."
Now, our solution for disarmament has 3 parts. Part 1, the UN resolution to ban nuclear weapons. Part 2, the incentives for nuclear weapon states to sign the resolution. And Part 3, the incentive of humanitarian aid and its reallocation.
The first part of our solution really entails a ban on nuclear weapons. The ban we are proposing to take the form of a UN resolution supplementing the NPT is fourfold. The first part of the plan involves an expansion of Article 6 of the NPT, affecting the ban not only on the possession of nuclear weapons, but also their use, production, and transfer. The second part, in an attempt to stop nuclear weapons at their source, prohibits direct or indirect assistance through investments in companies producing or involved with weapons. The third part specifies a framework for safe and time-specified elimination of nuclear weapons in nuclear weapon states. And the final part creates an international safeguard to make sure that countries who sign the treaty actually abide by it.
Now, there are several advantages and shortcomings of the nuclear ban, which we've tried to explain in these charts. The first advantage is being that there's a spirit of opposition against nuclear weapons. This makes it unlikely that nuclear weapons will be used, and it would apply political pressure on the nuclear weapon states to abolish the nuclear weapons. However, some of the disadvantages is that there would be no obligation to sign the treaty, so it could not be mandatory, and for that reason, there could be no legal enforcement on nuclear weapon states that chose not to sign. Furthermore, nuclear knowledge will always exist, so even if the weapons are disarmed, the knowledge still remains in the world. Now, this chart outlines how certain countries justify their possession of nuclear weapons in order to deter other specific countries from attacking them. In order to address these concerns, we believe that there needs to be a set of incentives for countries to sign the nuclear ban and willingly give up their arms.
As Lucia just mentioned, the main problem that we found with just a nuclear ban would then be a large number of nuclear countries, most likely including the United States, Britain, Russia, and France, wouldn't sign the document because they would want to protect their own countries and continue this idea of deterrence. So we're proposing a plan to try to mitigate that. Our incentive seeks to address the point and ensure that current countries can sign this treaty and also still have the idea of deterrence to protect themselves and their civilians. Our proposed incentive is thus predominantly fourfold. In a separate UN treaty, countries would be urged to voluntarily turn over all of their weapons to the control of the United Nations. Upon doing so, two things would happen. First off, the United Nations would dismantle some, but not all, of the weapons and dispose of the fissile material in Canada using the deep bore disposal system based on oil drilling technology. The weapons that the UN did not destroy would be secured by UN peacekeepers. Second, the UN would then enter a legally binding commitment with the country that gave up its nuclear weapons, agreeing that if a nuclear weapon is ever fired at the country that gave up its bomb, the UN will respond proportionally with the weapons that it just acquired. The end goal, once all countries have voluntarily given up their nuclear weapons, is that the United Nations would destroy the ones it maintained as part of the legally binding agreement. The main point of this plan is really that the justification for continuing possession of nuclear weapons is deterrence. To protect country A from country B, or to ensure that nuclear country A does not fire a nuclear bomb at nuclear country B because it knows that nuclear country B will respond proportionally. So what we're proposing is maintaining that idea of deterrence and incentivizing countries to join the treaty, while also ensuring that the world is moved one step closer to global disarmament.
Now, we have a couple of questions that we anticipated, and we're going to try to answer them. Question 1. What will be the process of turning over the nuclear weapons? Countries would first willingly sign an agreement with the UN. The United Nations would then assume full control of the nuclear weapons, inspecting them using the International Atomic Energy Association and securing them with UN peacekeepers. Once this process is over, the UN would disarm the majority of the nuclear weapons, except those needed to provide support against countries who were not willing to disarm their arms. Fissile material from the nuclear weapons would be disarmed using the deep bore method disposal and combined with oil drilling technology in Canada or another politically stable, geologically suitable country.
No doubt, a lot of people are also thinking that this plan probably violates the UN Charter. We believe that Article 42 establishes that the UN, quote, may take such action by air, sea, or land forces as may be necessary to maintain or restore international peace and security.
So now let's, for a second, compare the spending to aid. If we were to take the total nuclear spending by the 9 countries that hold nuclear weapons in 2011 alone, it would be equal to 42 years of the regular UN budget. That same year would fund around 14 years of the annual peacekeeping budget, estimated to be at around US $7.3 billion per year. Now, global spending on weapons is estimated to be at around $105 billion annually. If nuclear weapons did not have to be paid for each year, or if they were disarmed, there would be many more opportunities for humanitarian aid to be given. For example, if around $40 billion had been donated from 2002 to 2015, it would have been enough to meet the Millennium Goals on poverty relief. In fact, in 2011 alone, the amount of money spent on nuclear weapons was equal to the GDP of Bangladesh and twice the developmental assistance that we gave to Africa.
No doubt, a lot of you are probably asking right now, why would any country do this? Why would they implement the plan that we're proposing for the incentive, and why would they reallocate their money spent on nuclear weapons for essential aid purposes. In regard to the incentive, there are a number of specifics listed on the board, but the main idea for why we think countries would implement the incentives is A, that if countries voluntarily give up their nuclear weapons, they won't have to spend the millions, even billions of dollars per year to maintain, test, and keep their nuclear weapons. B, according to a study conducted by the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, 78% of people around the world, in 26 countries, support a nuclear ban. So countries saying that they're moving the world one step closer to nuclear disarmament is politically advantageous. And C, they could do all of this, accrue the vast economic, social, and political advantages, while ensuring the safety and deterrence of their civilians. In regard to reallocating the money spent previously for nuclear weapons for humanitarian aid, the process of doing so would ensure that each country abates its intrinsic poverty and unemployment.
In August of 1945, the world witnessed two unspeakable tragedies as the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by the nuclear bomb. Not only were thousands upon thousands of innocent civilians killed and injured, but long-lasting environmental and health consequences would also forever plague the two cities. And yet, despite this undeniable humanitarian threat that nuclear weapons no doubt pose, the world has primarily only seen the implementation of the NPT, a treaty that, though has been an important step towards ending nuclear proliferation, remains largely ineffectual in effecting global disarmament.
Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, once stated in a speech regarding nuclear weapons, quote, "Nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation are not utopian ideals. They are critical to global peace and security." But Ban Ki-moon's statement is an understatement, for disarmament is not just critical, but rather absolutely imperative for world peace. It is thus absolutely vital that we not only ban the bomb, but also provide a plausible and beneficial path for global disarmament that puts humanitarian issues first.
These following slides denote the resources we used when researching, as well as citations for each image on each slide.
Any questions?
First of all, I would like to thank you for your presentation. It was very well done and informative. My question for you is, let's say a signatory of the treaty decides to leave, like how North Korea did with the old NPT. How does your treaty plan to handle that situation? Will they let them go freely, or would they apply some sort of punishment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In regard to the specifics of the question, were you inquiring about the first treaty, which was a nuclear ban, or the second one, which was the incentive for disarmament?
I guess more first.
Okay. Yeah, so obviously that's a huge concern, and we saw that in 2003 when North Korea left the NPT in sort of questionable legality and stuff like that. What we're proposing for our plan is predominantly a nuclear ban. So we obviously have the systems already in place for the NPT, and already the process of withdrawing from specific treaties already in place from UN legislation and stuff like that. So we would continue current UN policy about sanctions if a country decides to leave.
And would the same be applied to the second part?
The second part's a little different because countries voluntarily hand over their nuclear weapons. So if they were to withdraw, they obviously couldn't get back their nuclear weapons because they would be disarmed, so it would be a little different in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Why do you think nuclear weapon states would ever give up their position of power?
So, thank you, Moeckel, for your question. We think that essentially all the countries that are shielded by nuclear alliances, well, they only have the increased power because they're able to fire the nuclear weapons. So, They still have to maintain this deterrent, but we think that by using our ban treaty, this would still be in place, and so the deterrent still would be in place, so the countries would still feel as safe as if they had their nuclear weapons.
To add on to that a little bit, a large number of countries, including Pakistan, Russia, the UK, and France, have all publicly stated that they will only use nuclear weapons in defense. So in our current system, countries will most likely not fire a nuclear weapon and not want to have that power of just being able to send a nuclear weapon whenever they want, but rather do it in defense. So we'd like to believe that the main point of continuing to hold possession of nuclear weapons, as Lucia just stated, is deterrence, so that other countries don't fire a nuclear bomb at another country. We think that our plan still addresses and takes into account that disarmament. And another thing to also take into account regarding that is the study that we mentioned conducted by the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. It's 78% of people support a nuclear ban. So we think that because people comprise different countries, the people will push the countries to adopt the proposal that we're proposing. Any other questions?